Hello, and welcome to Guys Dealings with Feelings, the podcast dedicated to addressing men's mental health issues and providing practical solutions. My journey has been profoundly shaped by the tragic loss of my son, and through this experience, I've gained valuable insights. I'm here to share what I've learned and continue to discover along the way. If you find this podcast helpful, please like, share, subscribe, and follow us wherever you're listening. Following us and your 5-star rating can make a significant difference in spreading our message and potentially changing someone's life. You can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcast under Guys Dealings with Feelings, and on YouTube and Instagram at ITU Thrive. That's the letter I, the number 2, the letter U, and the word Thrive. I'm so happy and grateful to have Logan Hufford with me today. Logan is a father and a husband living in the wilderness of Alaska. Logan is a recovering sex addict. He found his life in complete disarray as a result. Today, we're going to talk about the what, why, and how Logan was able to overcome his addiction. And I'm so appreciative to have you here, Logan. Thanks for being here, buddy.
Aaron, I so appreciate you giving me a chance to come talk with you and shout from your rooftop. Thank
Yeah,
you.
man, for sure, for sure. Vulnerability, I think, is such a huge thing, and so I don't know. It's hard for us to deal with. We hear the word, we're a little uneasy about it, and then I think we think about the wrong things when we think about vulnerability, and the strength that it takes to be vulnerable is tough. But what it's so key at doing is it opens us up to
Right.
learning. It opens us up to providing and helping. I mean, it's just so many things. So I'm so appreciative that you make your story available to others. We'll get a little bit into it now. If you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've ended up here on your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you the 30,000-foot view, and we can zoom in wherever you like. So I'm 34 years old. Been married for 13 years. We've got 4 boys: 12, 11, 10, and 8. And I got an ultimatum in 2015 that my wife, for the first time after years of cheating, porn, physical affairs, phone sex, prostitutes, the whole 9 yards. Years of that. She said, "Okay, if you don't get serious help, you will lose me and the kids." Um, and to that point, I still, I mean, I still didn't have hope. I didn't have hope for many years. Didn't even have hope then, but I was scared enough to try something different. And so that was the first moment that I started to do things differently. But what led up to that was porn throughout my years as a teenager, training my brain to chase after new and different, and to have instant gratification. Right, I'm going to have what I want, the way that I want it, whenever I want it. Uh, as an older teen, as a young adult, I'm playing those things out with real women in real life, including, I mean, I'm 34, been married for 13 years. So, I mean, I got married young. I mean, including when I was engaged, as a young dad, as a husband. When we got married, June 4th, 2011, I had already had multiple sexual affairs. Um, so it was this horror show. For many, the seeds had been planted before, but they were really, really, manifesting with external relationships, external acting out, in addition to, the porn and the masturbation and the addictions to those behaviors. And, it got to the point where, as a 22, 23, 24-year-old husband, dad, I hated my life. Not because I didn't have incredible things in my life. I did. I had an incredible wife, incredible boys. I hated the fact that they had me. I hated the fact that God put me on this earth. I mean, I believed in the existence of God, but I'm like, why would you create me? Why would you put me here when all I do is hurt people? And it's a heck of a thing to go through life looking at your boys when you come home from work and just absolute despair. Like there's no way I'll ever be able to lead them as a man. There's no way I'll ever be able to look them in the eyes and teach them, mentor them, walk with them, because I'm a fraud. I'm a monster. And that's how I felt. I felt completely hopeless and trapped. And I know I kind of jumped around a bit, but again, so going full circle to, I got that ultimatum, started to try to do things differently, which is very weak verbiage, but that's accurate verbiage, because I didn't instantly flip a switch and get healthy. I didn't instantly do all the hard work that was necessary, but I did start to go to some meetings. I started to reach out to some resources. God brought some people into my life, starting with a man, Rick, who became my personal mentor, sponsor. And then he introduced me to a group and a program, that an elective program, part of that group, that was called the Prodigals Mentorship Program. And so I got into a voluntary house arrest program, essentially, for about 2 years, almost exactly 2 years, 2016 to 2018, where I had a lot of freedom stripped away. I had a lot of things that I had to do very, very differently. But I was always reminded, like, you're gonna do things differently, and you're gonna give up some freedoms now so you can have true freedom for the rest of your life. And that's something that I did not think was possible. Again, as a 23-year-old, 24-year-old dad, did not think that freedom was ever possible, let alone healing. And that's a key thing. Sobriety, the idea of maybe possibly stopping the affair, stopping the porn, that was the finish line in my mind. Like, maybe I can stop doing these terrible things. And God didn't give me just sobriety. I've been able to experience true transformative healing, where, the way that I interact with life and stressors and my family and just people and is completely different. And not that I'm on a pedestal, but I have tools. I have resources. I'm equipped to deal with things in a way that I never was before. And just to give a quick little shout out, and my wife, Carrie, who's of course not with us today and on this conversation, but she jumped into healing from sexual betrayal trauma, because that's the whole other piece. All of this abuse that I'd put her through with constant cheating, with lying and gaslighting and manipulating her and just running her, through this whole horror show. So she jumped into recovery for her own healing just a couple months after I did. And so we've both been in active recovery since 2016. And I mean, it's a central part of our life, and I think always will be.
And yeah, I understand that there's two ways that things get started, and I don't admittedly know a ton about sexual addiction, but most addictions get started in a couple ways, and usually there's some trauma at the beginning of it. Did you, and I'm not asking you to share any
Sure.
trauma, of course, but did you find that there was some underlying trauma that this was a getaway from or a masking of? Alcohol and drugs often is that. And so I was wondering, is that in that it falls in line with what we're talking about a lot of times on this show, and people identifying root causes to understand why they tick the way they do.
Yeah. I'll be pretty short and sweet on this one. If you think about it like an origin story, my origin story is about as boring as you will ever hear from somebody in recovery. There's no perfect life. There's no perfect family, right? Like, I had parts of my upbringing that weren't perfect, but overall, I always felt safe. I always felt loved, raised by both my mom and my dad as the baby, or I'm the baby of 5. Pretty darn good life, pretty darn good infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But a key part of that is, which you can find different stats, but it's like 95% or more of people active in recovery from addiction have traumatic childhoods. Like, there's severe acute trauma that they were going through. I'm the extreme outlier that I don't have that. Yeah. But I'm honestly, one thing I can think of is, throughout my life, and I can still struggle with this even now, but especially before recovery, I was always so quick to find the ways that I was a victim in a certain scenario. That was kind of my MO. Mm-hmm. And I'm thankful that I didn't have anything to point to. Like this, no, even in the darkest times, I always knew, like, no, this was on me. Like, I made these choices. It wasn't because somebody did something to me. It wasn't because I was born as an addict. No, I made series, even though I didn't understand dopamine and how I trained my brain. I didn't understand all that, but I knew, like, no, these were my choices, and mm-hmm. nobody made me do these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was wondering if you had learned anything in the history. We got to go back. We got to understand why we are the way we are, and that's totally understandable too. I think that some people can just begin to use drugs recreationally, and it turns into a problem. And
right.
So I'm not saying that it just can't happen that way, but yes, I think it is an extremely high percentage where there is some trauma at the root. So I was just going to dig a little on that if there was. Totally cool that there wasn't. And so what type of program did you go to? Did you find yourself? So you told yourself you were going to work on it, or whatever that meant.
Right.
And I would assume you weren't successful at that. And so, did you go to a recovery program?
Yeah. So real quick, the first thing I did when I got that ultimatum is I went to a group that was, and that was a step, even though it definitely wasn't the step, but it was a step in the right direction. So I went to a Sex Addicts Anonymous. So I mean, if you think of AA,
Right.
it's that, but it's for sexual addiction.
Right.
And that I mean, there's some good things about that, but it was there was one thing that did not exist in that group, and I say this is not me from 2016 because that's unhealthy addict thinking. So that perspective doesn't probably mean a whole lot. But even looking back on it, there wasn't a lot of hope in that group. The way I think about it is this, like, so for many years, I always felt like I was trapped in this cave and there's no way out of this cave. Like, I got myself here, but there's no way out. Well, when I got to that group, I did see that there's other guys in the cave. And so it did help to take away some of the shame and like I'm alone in this, which was good. But that didn't really give me hope because I'm looking around. It was a small group. There was like 4 guys. They were kind of like, common. They were like the core of the group. And, a couple guys had 6 months of sobriety. One guy had like a year and a half, but like there was no like healing in his relationship. And so it was just kind of like, okay, like maybe I can stop the behaviors, maybe, but there was no transformed lives in that group. And then I went to another group that was similar, different. And it was just a general addiction recovery group. But at that group, I met somebody, this man, Rick, and he was like, he heard my story and he's like, all right, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for being here. I'm glad you're here. You need something more than this group. He goes, based on your story, because we were the only 2 guys that were there for sexual addiction. Everyone else was substances. And he was like, this group, Prodigals, that's what I needed. At this point, I think he had probably like 8 years of sobriety and recovery. He's like, you need this group, Prodigals. And so I finally went with him a couple months later, March of 2016. And this was the first time that I had hope because I had met him, but he could be an outlier, right? He could be an exception. But then I met other guys like him that had years of porn use, years of having affairs, all this. And they had not just sobriety, even though there was like 5, 10, 15 years on some of these guys, but most of them had restored marriages. They were healthy dudes that you sit down and talk, you would never have thought that they had the pasts that they had. That was the first time where I had the hope that like, okay, maybe there's a different kind of future for me, even though I still was doubtful that I could have it, but I was willing to try. And so I got into this Prodigals mentorship program, which is it's a Christ-centered 12-step recovery program. And again, it's essentially voluntary house arrest. There's no legal system with it, but I'm basically signing up. Like, I'm not going to get to go camping unless I have permission. I can't go on vacation for usually like the first year and a half. And even then I got to have permission. I got to have a written out safety plan for all this. Some guys are told that they need to change jobs if they want to be in the program, depending on like what line of work they're in. Living situations, sometimes people will speak in. So it's a very intense program. The first while when I was in the program, I had to take a selfie every time I'd go to work, send it to my mentor. Go to lunch, take another selfie, send it to my mentor. It's like, it was hardcore, but it's what I needed. I needed people to get in my face and go, hey, you're not doing the Logan show anymore. You're going to do things differently. You're going to submit to other people's counsel. You're going to, do things according to how other people think is best for a little bit so that you can learn how to actually be a healthy person.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I'm glad you're able to find that. And is that a pay program or something that somebody else can find, or how does that program work? Is it national? Is it just where you are in Alaska?
So there are Prodigals groups elsewhere, although my understanding there were, I think it's mostly Pacific Northwest. So I'm up here in Alaska. Mm-hmm. There were some, I believe, in Washington, Oregon. I think ever since COVID, they've stayed online, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. Cause it's like, it's great that you could be in Australia and you could join this group. But I do believe that if you can find an online or if you can find an in-person resource, there's no substitute for me being able to sit in a room with a dude across the table and look him in the eye like that. If I can find that, that is ideal. So I'm very thankful that I found an in-person resource. And a lot of what I talk about, like on my Instagram, is completely focused on this stuff. And a lot of, the content I put out there is like trying to help folks teach people how to fish, right? Because you are probably not going to find the exact same program, but I can help you, learn what to look for, what things to look for in a program, and also recognizing the resources that are available right now, today in this city. That's not necessarily always going to be there for better or for worse. I can find other resources. I can look for, if I diligently seek out healthy resources and healthy people to build a healthy infrastructure, I promise I will find them. I mean, I don't care where somebody is. If you diligently seek these things out, you will find resources. You will find people that are willing to help.
Absolutely. I think there's a mountain of kindness and people on missions, whether they themselves are in a recovery, they've gone through something traumatic, they just want to give back. There's so much kindness out there, but those resources often do get overwhelmed. And we will get to your Instagram handle at the end, but your Instagram is instructing people on all matters of sexual addiction, or getting the rehab, the rehab that surrounds it, obviously not.
Yeah, I try to accomplish, basically, number one, I want to continually bring awareness. Hey, this is real. Here's what it looks like to live in an addict's brain. Here's what it is, here's what it is to have this past. It's not excusing it, but it's recognizing, hey, this stuff happens. This stuff is out there. You are not the only one. I dive super deep into recovery tools, trying to give some practical nuggets of, how can I instill healthy tools and healthy thinking? I touch a little bit on the betrayal trauma aspect, in terms of, my wife's side of things. And of course, most of what I talk about, if you struggle with a different addiction, it's going to 100% apply, because at the end of the day, what I talk about in my local group that I now lead, when I'm working through my program, Instagram, 99% of what I'm doing is working on rewiring my brain, building healthy neural pathways, healthy dopamine cycles. And so, of course, there's specifics that, the way that a heroin addict versus the way that somebody is trying to quit cigarettes versus somebody who struggles with porn addiction, there's going to be differences in how they're setting up their boundaries and their rules and things like that. But a lot of this stuff, there's going to be a lot of commonalities. Building up healthy accountability, that's going to look pretty darn similar. Being willing to completely do things differently and let other people speak into my life. And sorry, I wasn't sure if that would mess with things, so I just paused for a second.
Yeah, I think we're good.
But letting people speak into my life and being willing to have my routines and my way of doing things completely ripped apart and then built new, brick by brick. Like those types of things, as I get into with guys, I mean, that applies to anyone that is recognizing that they've got problems, that they've got destructive tendencies, and they've tried, or they don't know how to stop. They don't know how to be healthy. Those things are going to apply no matter what.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk about some of those tools that you use. I would assume it's a constant. Any type of recovery is a constant thing. You don't stop once you get. There's no finish line.
Right.
I guess death, but until we get to death, we got to work this thing. And so, is other than just working the 12 steps, not to negate the 12 steps, or if you would like to throw in a different spin on, I think people who are interested in the 12 steps that are available, but a spin on that, or a tool that you use, a process that you use to implement a step, something like that?
One specific thing I'll dive into, because this is a tangible thing that every single person listening can apply, and it's going to look different for different people, but there are huge conceptual things from recovery that I'm very thankful for, that mindset shifts. But in terms of a specific tangible tool, the number one practical tool, in my opinion, of recovery was I had to make a phone call every single day. That was a requirement. If I didn't make a phone call, I got a strike. 3 strikes, you're out. So this is a phone call, outgoing, not you calling me to check on me, not my mentor calling, but me making a call to somebody in recovery. So I'm not calling my mom, I'm not calling my wife, I'm not calling my pastor. Those are fine, but this is somebody who they're in the trenches with me, or they've been in the trenches. They know what it is that I'm going through, and I'm sharing how my day has been. And then I shut up and listen. You can give me whatever feedback you want. You can give me whatever advice you want. You can ask me whatever questions. You can check on any red flags that you want to check on. And I'm not allowed to speak unless you ask me a question I can respond to it. That does so much. It strips away so much unhealthy pride, so much ego. It forces me to absorb and chew on your feedback. And of course, I don't have to necessarily take your advice. I don't have to do the things that you're suggesting, but it forces me to at least sit in it for a little bit and not immediately respond, which is that's not how humans normally communicate, right? I listen to respond to you. I mean, that's a pretty common struggle that I struggle with. And so making a phone call forced me to do that. But then of course the actual, what we call getting current, me making a phone call to share how my day has been, that's a skill. There's definitely a skill to it that took time to get good at, but it forces me to take all this junk, stressors, frustrations, sexual triggers. I yelled at my wife. I got angry at my kids. I'm ticked at my boss. I lied, whatever. And I just put all this stuff out there. And it's like, I got this bucket of muck, and I'm not dumping it in front of my wife. I'm not venting to her about it, but I'm not just venting to my buddy who's going to be like, oh man, you're good, dude. You're all good, buddy. I'm dumping this bucket of junk in front of somebody who's equipped to help me deal with it. So this recovery brother or this mentor, whatever he's going to help me kind of sift through the muck. Okay, so what things can Logan do differently, going forward? What things are inside of Logan's control, and what things does Logan need to figure out a way to let go of? Where has Logan had some victories here that we can work on replicating, and where has Logan maybe had some backsliding? So it's, and not every phone call was like filled with golden nuggets of advice and wisdom. There's been plenty of phone calls I would make where the guy on the other end goes, appreciate making a call. I don't have any feedback. I don't have any questions. But I was still exercising that muscle of being transparent. The word you hit on at the very start, vulnerability. Because it's one thing to be transparent, to say, hey, here's what I got going on. But if I just put it out there and you're not allowed to give me feedback, then there's no vulnerability. And that is one of the biggest differences between prodigals and, not all, but I'm going to say right now, most recovery organizations, and I've been to a lot, there is a version of getting current, right? It's I share how my day has been, I share my life story, I share my week. But most recovery groups, they don't want crosstalk. And I understand why, but they want it to be a safe place. They want it to be a space where you're not going to, people aren't yelling over each other. And so most places don't allow for tough feedback. They don't allow for hard-hitting questions. So I'm transparent, but I'm not necessarily vulnerable in reality, because you're not allowed to speak into my life. You're not allowed to ask me those questions. And the other thing with that too is, when I got into recovery, I was a liar. I was a manipulator. I was working the room, and I knew how to tell you a little bit, right, to make you feel like I'm being really vulnerable. But in reality, I'm only giving you 10% of the truth. And so at Prodigals, people are like, dude, you told me this last week, but now you're saying this. These things don't match up. What's going on? They'd call me out on that stuff. So phone calls, I will always emphasize just as one specific thing, because it was such a game-changing tool, and it's a tool that I still use, not every day, but regularly.
Yeah, I love that. I'm pondering as you speak to wonder how that's, I love the tool in the program that you went to, because it's a great tool in many ways. Accountability and introspection, I believe, is the goal. Living within ourselves, focusing on just self and how we can be the best human possible and all that. I'm all in on all those things. So I'm trying to think of how one not in a program could find that and I know I'm thinking out loud, but here's
Sure.
what I'm trying to say that. So accountability partners wouldn't work here, because an accountability partner A is usually just one person, and B, I really, unless it's a therapist, I steer people away from doing it anybody that they care too much about, because when the person does what you've asked them to do and you're not in the same frame of mind you are when you ask them to do it, then you turn into an asshole to
Because not play.
to some right to
Right.
someone who you love, and you've asked them to do something, they've doing what you asked them to do, and here
Right.
you are being, not you, but here now I'm being this jerk to them because this ain't the day I want to be called out.
Right.
And in this program, they're saying every day an individual is to call and be held accountable, A, for their actions, but B, just really to any advice that one wants to give them. And that is, like we said, the vulnerability piece, the accountability piece, listening to other ideas. Like you say, you don't have to take them, but you have to listen to them, which is the first step. I just think that's huge. So what you were trying to say, something I didn't let you. What were you trying to
Well,
say?
just because I appreciate your point, and that's something I always have to remember too. Is like, not only is this group not necessarily going to be available, but yeah, if somebody, depending on what they're dealing with, what they're working through, yeah, the manifestation of how these tools can be applied is going to look different. So one piece of recovery that I hold very, very near and dear to my behavior that will I don't think ever go away is I statements. Like I have to use I statements in recovery. I don't talk about we, they, you, them. It's here's what I got going on. Here's the stuff I'm working on. Here's the stuff that and so through that lens, here's what somebody can apply, even if they don't have a recovery group or a therapist situation where they can maybe do it exactly how I was describing it. But if I want to apply that tool of making a phone call, if I'm listening to this podcast, right, I can earnestly seek out feedback and recognize I don't have to do it all, but it's a good muscle to exercise, to listen to other people. Ideally, people that have something that I want, right? They've got the type of marriage that I want. They've got the type of relationship with their kids that I want. They've got the type of finances that I want, whatever. But to seek out those opportunities, listen to their feedback. It's probably not going to look exactly like it did in my recovery program when it comes to phone calls, but I can still do the listening part, right? And to your point, yeah, the giving the feedback part, unless somebody truly wants to sign up for that, and to your point, it may or may not be wise to even engage in that unless two people really know what they're doing. But I can do the listening part. I can do the seeking out of feedback part. I love extreme ownership. I mean, the idea, that Jocko was always hitting on of, okay, what's within my control? What can I work on here? That's what it's all about. Is what I might have a relationship with my boss where I can't stand him, and it just feels like he just doesn't know what he's doing, and he treats me like garbage. But I can listen to his ideas. I can listen to his feedback. I can see maybe there's 1% of what he's saying that can be really applicable and helpful. Even if 99% of it, I chew on it and I end up spitting it out. But if I earnestly seek out that 1%, good. Let me take that 1% and move on with life. And if I, going back to, we talked about earlier, if I earnestly seek out wisdom, if I earnestly seek out healthy feedback, I'm going to get a lot more than just 1%. I'll get a lot of healthy feedback, a lot of wisdom, but I've got to intentionally seek it out.
Yeah, and there's several steps. The step of surrounding yourself with those who you want to be like. The step of then you have people you can trust to give you the right feedback.
Right.
And I'm thinking about drugs, alcohol, sex addiction, anything that you want to be held accountable on, and or overcome or fix. And I think you're right. When we set the goal, this is what I want to do, and we actively go forward on that on a daily basis, working towards it, we will find the answers that we're looking for. Anybody listening that's found themselves kind of over the first hump of I'm going to do this and the whys and all that, I encourage you to find some, whether it's a group established for what it is you're struggling with, whether it's a group of friends that you really trust and can give you no BS feedback without judgment. Things, this is I love the tool. I think it's amazing. And the reason I'm trying to go on and belabor this point is I think it's so awesome, but I can also hear somebody who's struggling, like, I'm even willing to do it, but I don't know how the heck I'm going to put that team together. So that's why I'm kind of babbling around on all that. I think it's so valuable, and the program sounds awesome, even though I've not done a 12-step program. That's not what got me to where I am.
Yeah.
I love the program that you went through, and that tool that you just shared. That's one of the more valuable tools I've heard. So that's why I'm carrying on so much about it, because I love it. And I love the layers of it, what it teaches us, and the habits and the challenge that comes with doing it, the accountability with it. So I love everything about that. So moving forward, uh, you had a why. That was the wife and the kids. And apparently, your wife isn't with us, so we're not going to ask her any questions in her absence. But clearly she was able to forgive you, and you were able to. So I would call, objectively looking at your story, you a very lucky husband and very lucky father. There's a lot of guys who don't go through what you went through, and they don't get to see, their kids, and they don't have their wives. And so I think you're very fortunate. And is gratitude a huge piece of your life? Are there some other things, perspective, things like that you're constantly focusing on to keep yourself finely tuned? I mean, I'm sure you're extremely good. You seem like an amazing human being. What you're doing is amazing. So these are pretty softball questions, but I really want you to go on about that, because a lot of us fail to be grateful for the awesome things that we have in our lives because they're not on TV, and we're not rock stars, and we don't have millions and millions of dollars. When in reality, being a rock star or having millions and millions of dollars, it doesn't make up for your family and people loving you. Like, those are two totally different things that don't connect. And so I think it's huge that we be grateful. So I would like to hear kind of where you are on gratitude and perspective in your journey.
Yeah. And I recognize, like, what I'm about to say here, maybe I don't know how prescriptive this is going to be, but it's going to, in terms of other people listening, but it's absolutely an honest answer. Gratitude is one of the most giant motivators in my life. And I mean on a daily, multiple times a day basis. 8+ years into recovery, there is not a day that I don't thank God for recovery. That I as a nightly ritual, I go in and I just kiss every boy goodnight, just touch them on the head, thank God for them, pray for them, pray for my family. To do that, knowing what life was for so many years. I mean, you and I talked offline about how, what we're not here to do is talk about the old days and, glorify unhealthy ways and stuff like that. And I don't do that. I do remember what it was like, in the sense of, I don't ever want to forget how hopeless I was. I don't ever want to forget how much despair and self-hatred filled my life, because it absolutely spurs me on to, I'm not perfect. I screw up. I get mad. I get short with my wife, but it spurs me on to keep short accounts, to apologize very quickly, to not hold resentment, to do what I can to be the best dad I can be. Because there's no freaking way I should be able to go home to my kids. Right. There's no way I should be able to wash dishes next to my wife. There's no way, when I graduated, I got to give a little speech and share my testimony and stuff, and Carrie did as well, my wife. And, my boys were younger then. So I was like, I don't deserve to go home and change diapers. Right. Like, and that's 100% true, obviously. You heard my story. And I keep that on the forefront of my mind. And it does help, because there are those moments, again, definitely I can be short. I can be selfish with the best of them, but there are plenty of moments, and these things happen all the time, where it's like, okay, I'm frustrated. I'm butthurt about something Carrie said, or I want to hold resentment or whatever. And then I get reminded. It's like there's this little voice talking, like, dude, you almost lost your family, and you should have lost your family because of your years of sexual addiction and betrayal and abuse. And God gave your family back to you. How much of a freaking fool would you have to be to hold resentment over your wife and let that destroy your marriage, right? Or to rage on your kids and lose your kids because of your anger, when God gave them back to you after what you did. And so, like, it doesn't make me never do a wrong thing, but it absolutely helps keep me in check, because it puts it all into perspective. And just, I mean, there's an incredible contentment and peace, and not contentment in the sense of, the complacency, like to an unhealthy degree, but just, I'm so thankful that I can just talk with my boys and know that I don't have secrets, that I don't have shame, that I don't have a double life, that my wife and I can just talk about stuff. And, to give a very specific example, is like I always give, when we're driving, to be able to have my phone paired up to the Bluetooth, not worrying about if I get a phone call or a text to come through. Whereas for years, I wouldn't do that. To be able to have my phone charging, in the kitchen while I'm taking a shower downstairs and not care who texts me or who calls me because I'm not worried about it.
Right.
For years, I couldn't do that. Right. And so like those things still, maybe there will be a day where like I don't think about those things. 8+ years in recovery, I'm still reminded, and it still gives me gratitude for the life of freedom that I'm able to have now.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're doing with it, using it as a tool. You clearly don't live in that space because you're clearly a happy human being, but you're using it as a tool to say never again. You're
Right.
remembering the darkness so that you can see how light it is.
Absolutely.
Even when it seems dark right now, you're like, yeah, it ain't that dark.
Yep.
And it's not, I'll be clear to anybody listening. This is not to say that if you screw up in a relationship and you decide to work things out, that means that you've worked things out, that you're not to wear the red A around your neck for forever, but you are forever to remember that you were shown grace, and
Yep.
that you need to show yourself grace, and you need to show everyone around you grace. And I
Yeah.
believe that is a key feature in recovery. I'm not a very empathetic human being. I think it's from training. I was not raised by empathetic people. So learning to be empathetic, learning to understand, and learning to give others grace has been a huge thing for me. But what it does is it gives us, like you say, this inner peace where we don't have turmoil. I think leaving your phone laying around is a good example. I'm free to do any of those things. And one of the trivial things that when I haven't drank in a long time, I now know that at any time, 24 hours a day, I can hop in a car and drive. And
Yeah.
there was many, many years where I couldn't do that. And that's weird. But when you do it for so long and you make I made a conscious effort not to drink and drive. I did, when I was younger, I did it and it was just stupid. And I,
Yeah.
in a courtroom, saw how lives were ruined. So anyway, I digress. The keeping the darkness as a never go back. I don't ever want to quit alcohol again myself, so I understand that. And so less of a softball on this one is you've mentioned God several times, and I'm very appreciative of that, and I'm very respectful of that. So this is not in any disrespect at all, but
Sure.
this is a question I often have for people who've gone through a 12-step program is I am big on one maintaining their power and maintaining their control over self. That's what we do with self. So the circumstances surrounding us, the people surrounding us, and all that, we do have a little control over those things. But once we've chosen them, they get to do them, and we do us. So I'm
Right.
big on what we do is ours. It's for ownership, which I'm not saying you don't do any of these things. I'm just, because of what you said, I'm asking this question. Ownership of what we've done negatively, but then on the flip side and on the recovery side, ownership of what we've done positively, and
Right.
ownership of how strong we are because we've been able to do these things. And that is huge when the metal meets the meat, the rubber hits the road, and it's like, whether you're a drug addict and that drug shows up in your life 5 years later, 8 years later, somebody, you're at a party and you're coming out, you've been off cocaine for 8 years, and somebody throws a bunch of cocaine on the table, right then, what are you going to
Yeah.
do? And I I worry a lot that people who lean too hard on a higher power, not to take away from the higher power at all, but when they lean too hard on that, they detract from the strength that they have.
Yeah.
How do you maintain confidence in your strength as Logan versus turning it all over to God? And I know we haven't gotten into that, but I can only
Yeah.
guess that, because of the 12-step program, and you're clearly a faithful man, again, totally respect. I'm just curious, how do you maintain your strength and know that you are in control of driving the ship, both when things don't go good, when you make bad decisions, but also when you put 8 years together of doing how good you've been doing, and
Yeah.
in the self-reflection and all that. How do you, I guess, how do you take credit for the wins? I know you take credit for the losses,
Yeah.
but how do you take credit for the wins, and maintain the relationship with the higher power and all that? I hope you hear what I'm asking.
I 100% do. And I hugely respect and appreciate the question because it's a very valid question. Um, I'll try to give you a good answer because it was a very good question. Number one, I will say, I struggle to take credit for the wins. I do, in not just in recovery, but in life. I struggle to take a compliment. I struggle to, I struggle with that, and not to go like super deep into it, but because partly because of my past, but just in general, because of ego and insecurities and stuff like that. I know what it looks like for me to be really unhealthy with all that, so I try to be really careful to not feed that part of me. But I do struggle, so 100% don't have it figured out. I absolutely believe and I am grateful for, number one, God setting things in motion that I don't have control over. Um, the way that God, I mean, I absolutely believe this. I mean, I believe that God put like landmarks in my story. For Carrie to have the strength and the wisdom to give me that ultimatum when she had no training, she had not attended recovery, she had not but she did something that she had never done before, that most women in an abusive situation will not do. And she stood up to her abuser, and said, I can't control what you do, but I can control how I respond. I'm thankful for that. And of course, I didn't have control over that, right? I'm thankful for God putting Rick at that one meeting where, that meeting wasn't even the meeting where I would get in the program, but that's where I met him. So like all of these landmarks, all of these things outside of my control, I'm so thankful for that. And then in terms of the personal stuff, I'm thankful for how God has equipped me. And I absolutely, and to try to tie it into how you asked your question, I view it like this. I'm thankful for how God has equipped me to make the right decisions, but it's still up to me to make the right decisions. Because for so long, I didn't feel like I could. At some point, it felt like I just automatically make the wrong choice. I just automatically make the unhealthy choice. And I still, deep down, I knew that it was up to me, but it felt like I didn't know how to, I think about it like I'm going 100 miles an hour down a highway and I don't know how to get off the highway. And recovery has taught me that there's always off ramps. I'm in control of the car, but in addiction, it didn't feel like that. I mean, I was talking to a buddy about this literally just yesterday, where it's like one of the key, I don't remember the specific day, but one of the key moments in recovery where it's like, okay, things are different. This was like 2 years into sobriety. I'd almost graduated. And I remember thinking like, and I'm not going to get graphic, but I'm going to give a specific example. I remember this idea that like, if a woman walked up to me and just full on propositioned me, I wouldn't give into that. I'd move away from the spot. I would make a phone call. Because I remember thinking about this like early on in recovery, like if that happened, if that extreme thing happened, I couldn't say no. I couldn't not give in. I just wouldn't be able to. And so that's one specific example, but like, having the strength and learning the tools and, just new muscle memory. Like I'm so thankful for that. And ultimately, I mean, I believe that God is the creator of the universe. He designed my brain to work the way it does. He designed my muscle memory to work the way it does. And so I'm just, I am, again, the two things I guess I'll just go back to are I'm thankful for how he has equipped me to make the right choices, even though it's up to me to make it or not. And then I'm thankful for all those things that he set into motion that I don't have influence or control over.
Right. And I'm, to everybody listening, this is just me being me. And, anybody that knows me knows that's what I'm going to do, whether it's playing devil's advocate or just from a personal position. And I'm just so huge on milestoning and understanding the strength. So when you're telling me your story and your thankfulness for Rick, your thankfulness for Carrie, I totally see where you're coming from, and I see God's place there. But I see the strength in Logan, like a dude who was clearly extremely off the rails,
Yeah.
made themselves susceptible to meeting Rick. And, you were there and you did take those steps. And those are big wins. Those are big milestones. And I understand they're just baby steps in this monster of
Right.
a marathon. But
Right.
man, are they huge baby steps? Like without any of these steps, you're not where you sit today. And I respect that. And so that's why I asked the question. I'm not, I think that any way that one can find help and find their way and find their happiness and find their fulfillment, that's what I support. And that last question was more Aaron being Aaron, because I am very inquisitive about that. I'm very interested in all the dynamics that surround that. Being I was raised by a minister, and so that has had a big influence on my life. And
Yeah.
being agnostic, I look at things just with a different lens. I don't know if there is
Mm-hmm.
or isn't a God. I think it's silly for me to say there's not a God with any type of certainty. That sounds silly. I'm way more spiritual today than I've ever been in my entire life. I'm connected with all that is around me. It's clear the resemblance in the trees and the way that they communicate all the way to humans. There's so many things going on. The complexities are mind blowing, and the humility that comes with that. And so I totally respect it all. And I hope that I didn't come off anyway, but
Not at
inquisitive.
all.
All right, great.
No.
So man, to wrap things up, Logan, and I'm sure appreciative of your vulnerability to share what you've shared. Your wife sounds like a saint, and I think she could club you in the head and smile, and you'd say, "Well, thank you, honey. I probably needed to be clubbed in the head." You know what I mean? And I understand that she is. I don't know. Again, admittedly, I don't know a ton about sexual addiction, the victims involved with that, how that's
Right.
abuse, and how the addict actually uses it to abuse, much like an addict within drugs and alcohol does the same. So I don't see that, but for her to be the way she is, I'm glad that you do catch yourself on some things, because I think she could take the rolling pin to your head and be all right.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
and so, but I'm appreciative she stuck with you, because it's clear that she was instrumental in creating a remarkable human being who is now using his voice to do really good in this world. And man, do we need more of that. So thankful for your recovery, both that you got your life back, that you were able to save your family and all that. So I'm very happy for you on that. And it's absolutely so awesome to see what you're turning it into. And with all that in mind, man, I want to give you this opportunity to tell us any handles you want to tell us social media wise, any projects that you have going on, whether they're current or upcoming, ways that we can keep our eyes on you, things like that, man.
Yeah. The biggest thing here is Instagram. Give me a follow on Instagram. If you've found this conversation at all helpful, insightful, interesting, check me out at No Longer in Bondage. And that is purely and simply because starting about 6 months to a year ago, I changed because I lead recovery groups and I attend recovery groups regularly. And, for 7.5 years, I would say I'm Logan Hufford, and recovering sex addict. And I think that was good. It was identifying the problem. It was identifying the thing that I was working on. But I did start to have this conviction, this pull that I'm going to start saying I'm no longer in bondage to sexual addiction, because it's not that I could get myself back in bondage. I could choose to go back, but I don't have to. Those shackles are off. And so that's my Instagram handle. There's periods in between the words, no longer in bondage, or you can just search for Logan Hufford. But I put out regular content, and it's not lightweight stuff. It's not going to be B-roll of me sipping coffee with like a couple cute little motivational words up there. I dive into addiction, recovery, tools, all this stuff. And then I don't have a book, I don't have a course. There's some things that may be in the works, and ultimately I'm not saying this just to try to get people to follow me, but as that stuff comes up, I will be putting that stuff out there on Instagram. So
Right.
if you want to shoot me a message, if you have a question, if you want help finding resources, you want to hop on a phone call, I'm willing to do that. Again, this is a ministry. This is not my profession. This is not how I make a living, but this is my life. This is God has given me this incredible gift, and I'm not trying to hold on to it in my back pocket. I'm trying to do whatever I can to give to others. So give me a follow, and you can get in contact with me. No longer in bondage.
Great. That's awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing, and everybody listening, thank you so much for giving us your time. We know that's your most valuable asset, and the fact that you share it with us, we do not take it lightly, and we really hope that we've added value to your day. Until next time, I hope you have a great day.